After the first night of my first sailing ship experience, I was for the first time in over 100 cruises I've done considering leaving the cruise. But before I get into that, let me step back and explain exactly why I ended up on this sailing ship. Welcome aboard. I'm Gary Bembridge. I've tried many types of cruising, regular ocean ships, expedition ships, river cruising boats, and I've even been on a 14-person barge cruise in France. So after seeing sailing ships in ports around the world, I decided to try one. The first issue I faced was which one. Now, I knew there were several lines offering sailing ships, but they were not companies I knew much about, and I was concerned about how reliable they would be and if I would actually enjoy them. While my research showed dedicated sailing ship lines like Star Clippers, Sea Cloud and Club Med, I went with Windstar, a line I'd happily traveled on their cruise ships before because I knew they also had sailing ships and it felt like a safer choice. So I booked an 8-night Venice to Rome cruise on their flagship Windstar. Though, as you'll hear, that choice wasn't entirely the best one. The cost was higher than I expected, over $1,000 a night for 2 people for a mid-range ocean view cabin on deck 2. That was the same cost as my previous cruise on Holland America Amsterdam, where that had bought me a fancy large Neptune balcony suite. On top of the $1,000 a night, there were add-on costs for drinks, Wi-Fi and gratuities, plus of course items like laundry and excursions were extra too. Though specialty dining, sodas and specialty coffees were included in the fare. So based on the price, my expectations were very high, wondering what the fare would get me instead of that nice big cabin that I got on a regular cruise ship. This high expectation is probably why the issues I ran into on embarkation day weighed heavily on me, probably more so than they would normally do. When I first saw Windstar, it looked larger than I imagined. It's one of the world's largest sailing ships with 5 masts, carries 342 passengers, and it did look old, which it is, 36 years old in fact. Though on the plus side, it looked very unique, very different to anything I'd cruised on before. And although it seemed bigger than expected, it was small enough that it could sail into the heart of Venice, unlike even small cruise ships that are no longer allowed there. We sailed out past St. Mark's Square, and as we did, I was reminded that one reason people pay the premium for sailing ships is because they can go to places like this that other ships can't. Although, as you'll hear later, it didn't always play out as I expected. But one example, I thought checking in would be simple, being so few passengers, but it was rather slow and took me longer than even on some of the big mega ships I've been on, which have a more automated process because of apps and online to speed things up. For example, what happened is I joined a long line to just get the health and marina use waiver forms. Then I had to sit and wait while filling it out. Then slowly, small groups were called through security. Then once I'm bored, I had to line up again to check in to the cruise in the lounge. Once checked in though, I had a chance to explore. And several things struck me about this specific sailing ship, but also sailing ships more generally. The older nature of the ship did show a little bit in parts. I noted as I boarded that the carpets on the stairwells were rather threadbare. Other guests commented on that too, which struck me as a little bit strange because the Windstar public areas had been renovated in the last year. But the public areas that had been redone looked stylish and contemporary. They had the feel of Windstar yachts that I've been on, and I really liked the palette, I liked the decor. Although in some ways it did kind of jar a little bit with a very traditional looking sailing ship on the outside. But I must say the new areas, the public areas, looked good. As I explored the ship, it struck me that I expected a sailing ship to be more different to regular cruise ships, but it was not. It largely had what all have, a choice of bars and lounges, the largest being cabaret theatre style for shows and talks. It had a coffee shop with all-day snacks. It had shop, fitness centre and spa, receptions, shore excursions and future cruise sales desk, all the stuff you'd expect. There were also several dining venues, including a buffet, a main dining room, and 2 specialty dining options. By the way, over the course of the cruise, I found the food in the buffet to be fine, but the Amphora main dining room and specialty restaurants were really good, helped by their partnership with the James Beard Foundation. They use different award-winning chefs to put dishes on the menus. Now outside there was a pool deck with hot tubs, plenty of deck areas with chairs and lounges. Though unlike some cruise ships, it did not have a casino, a kids club, a photo center, an art gallery and art sales, or guest laundry rooms. But it did have a marina at the rear of the ship that was open for swimming and water sports when we were anchored off a port, which ended up being great fun. Though once I got to my cabin, this is where my doubts about the premium price actually returned. On On a sailing ship, there are no cabins with balconies at all. The cabins are quite small. It's a small ship. They have portholes. All cabins are in the hull of the ship, and the bathroom was small and dated. In fact, the whole cabin was dated. But I knew coming on that would be the case because they're scheduled for an update at the end of this year. I realized straight away that a bigger cabin and the lack of balcony was probably something that I was going to miss. However, my cabin had an issue. It was absolutely freezing cold. The air conditioning was noisy and the controls didn't work at all to adjust it. Now, someone did come to fix it during sail away, but while getting the temperature a bit more reasonable, it was still really noisy. That first night I struggled, even with earplugs in, to sleep. It was during the night that I thought I just couldn't stay with this noise unless they could do something about it. In the morning, they sent the engineers back, who basically said, look, this is an old ship and this is how the air conditioning is. So they stuffed some added padding in to reduce the noise some, and I found that with earplugs, it was possible for me to sleep, and so I kind of accepted that and moved on. Now, speaking to others, they also had issues with air conditioning, although theirs were too hot rather than too cold. I had my toilet flushing a little bit erratic at times, so signs that the age of the ship infrastructure is probably affecting some of the way things work. There weren't plugs to charge phones by the bed, but again, I assume this will change in the cabin refurbishment. But not having got off to the best start with my cabin, I decided I should focus on where my fare was delivering the value I was seeking. The unique experience of cruising with sails would be one, or so I thought. I quickly discovered that the windsurf always sailed under power, and the sails were there to increase speed and to reduce fuel usage. I noted the first night as the sails were put out for the first time sailing down the canal in Venice that we were clearly sailing under power, and the sails seemed to be playing no role at all. So the next day I went to talk to officers, which you can do because there's an open bridge policy, and they confirmed that the ship operates under power, which can take the ship up to 10 knots. And when the wind is right, they can use the sails to increase speed by up to 5 knots, and of course to reduce fuel usage. They also said the ship in theory could in the right conditions sail with only the sails, but to stick to the itinerary and because the weather and the wind doesn't always play ball, the ship sails under power. At the captain Q&A later in the cruise, he said the sails being put out at every sail away was often more for effect, as they were also on our rather nice sunny sea day. Now I realized I should have researched sailing ships better, as it only dawned on me during the trip that I was wrong to assume that all sailing ships are the same. If I really wanted a fuller sailing experience with big billowing sails, sailing under wind power, I should have booked on one of the lines like Star Clippers and Sea Cloud that I had discarded, because they use and sail what are known as tall ship lines that use the sails more fully. I'd also expected sailing ships would move differently to cruise ships, but partly because we were sailing under power, but also because windsurf has stabilizers like regular cruise ships, it moved no more or differently than any small regular cruise ship that I've been on. But despite all that, I kept on enjoying the ports, and I kept looking at where the strengths and advantages of going on the sailing ship really were. At the start of the cruise, the weather wasn't great, which made the smaller daily program, the less appealing cabin to relax in versus bigger ships, meant there wasn't as much to keep me busy because I couldn't go sitting out enjoying warm weather and the sights. It just wasn't viable. Now, across the trip, the program did include trivia, cooking demonstration, galley tour, occasional dance classes, occasional local cultural performers, and daily port overviews, but there wasn't a lot going on. There was, by the way, live music around the ship in the evenings from a saxophone player, a pianist, and a dance band trio. And there was very but more low-key singing shows put on by the cruise director or those live musicians. No production shows. However, once the weather changed late in the trip, the sailing ship vibe and experience changed dramatically. There were lots of cozy places on deck to relax, and the fact that there was more seating in the veranda buffet outside than inside, more seating outside of Compass Rose Bar than inside, made these popular venues become energized and busy, and the vibe really changed as the weather improved. Now, when I'm on a large regular cruise ship, there's so much more to do indoors. There's a much busier program, so it's definitely less reliant on good weather. But I felt, based on my experience on a sailing ship with fewer venues, lighter program, and the cabins, that good weather is key to the experience. The second half of my cruise was dramatically different. So I absolutely enjoyed the onboard experience during my second half of the trip when we had great weather. I enjoyed the ports we visited, but I was conflicted about the much touted advantage that sailing ships claim to have when it comes to ports. Let me explain. It's argued by the lines that sailing ships have several big pluses when calling into ports. The ships can dock in, as I mentioned, in the heart of, say, Venice, but also can sail into the heart of other popular ports, Shanghai, Ho Chi Minh City, Marseille, and so on. These are all places where cruise ships have to dock in working ports right way out of town. They can even anchor by Old Town Dubrovnik, while bigger ships have to dock in a port much further away. They can also go to ports too small or out of the way for cruise ships to call on, as they can anchor, and it's really easy to tender because there's so few people. However, while both are 100% true and fantastic, I found the reality once I was out in port was probably worth considering a bit more when I had chosen the route that I was doing the sailing trip on. Because most of the ports on my itinerary were actually places that were really popular with tourists, and they were rammed and busy. Though of course I was in most ports right on the doorstep, and I avoided the need for lengthy transfers from working ports. But the port experience wasn't quite as I'd expected in some ways. For example, in Split, there were 2 large cruise ships there that day, plus with all the land-based tourists, the town was very bustling and I had to shuffle through parts of it like everybody else. So there was no pro of being on a smaller ship in an out-of-the-way port. The same situation I found in Kotor, where by mid-morning 2 ships also arrived and the old town filled up. In Sorrento, which only the smallest cruise ships like Azamara Quest that was there the day we were there too, can go to, because there's no dock there. It's a really popular place though for land tourists, and so again was busy and packed with lots of tour groups. So while I saw a huge upside on the sailing ship, as it's easy to get on and off, you can dock and anchor places cruise ships can't, the benefit is going to vary based on the itinerary and the ports, and on my itinerary it was less of a plus. So to find out why some people swore by the sailing ship experience and told me they kept coming back, I decided I needed to spend more time finding out why. The size was key. People loving the experience saw cruise ships, even smaller ones like the 700 guest Azamara Quest that was with us in Sorrento, as having just too many people. Interestingly, a lot of people I spoke to went on river cruises as they liked the fewer guest numbers. But that I felt also helped explain things that I was less keen on that they had no issues with, and in fact even valued. They loved that with so few passengers, the crew got to know many of them by name and their likes. They were all passionately interested in the destinations of the port and wanted no or minimum sea days to see as much as possible. They also valued the longer and more destination immersion tours on the sailing ship that were offered by Windstar in every port. So whilst they wanted a nice ship, good food and a decent cabin, they were less concerned about some of the aspects that I valued more when I go on a cruise. So for example, I noticed the daily program activities were really sparsely attended, even that classic trivia, which is normally packed. The only events that drew many passengers, in fact most passengers, were the daily port overviews and also, by the way, the cruise show. On the cruise, they spent so much time out in ports that when they came back, they valued the quiet, low-key cruise the sailing ship offered when they returned after a busy day in port. They wanted dinner and go to bed. The highlight for many on board was the scenic sailaway though, where it felt like everyone's out on deck celebrating the day in port and watching the sailaway. The other set of people who really enjoyed it were those that didn't want a cookie-cutter experience. So whilst I like cruise ships which are familiar, have lots of facilities, bigger shows, larger cabins, and more dining options, they preferred something more unique, something different, which a sailing ship like Windsurf delivers. I realized that while for most sailing ship fans found the fare gave them great value based on their priorities and needs, the balance for me didn't really, because I realized I rate things like a bigger cabin with balcony for sure really highly, more choice of dining venues and places to go, more things to do, a more packed daily program of events. And I do value having a casino. I want bigger shows. Ports and itinerary, of course, are really key. Though I realize because I've done a lot of cruises, 130 at the time of making this, I'm fortunate to have been to many of the ports at least once. And this experience helped me show that the ship experience has become even more important in balancing between ports and the ship experience. So whilst this wasn't for me, I'm 100% glad I tried it. I doubt I will go back, but I'm sure this sailing ship experience will have sounded ideal for many people, perhaps for you. But if it doesn't, but you love the idea of a circa 300 passenger small ship experience, join me over in this video where I review the Windstar yachts. See you over there.